Welcome back to season 2 Women of the Wild podcast. I am your host, Felicia Marie. We're doing things a little bit different for today's episode. That I'm actually a guide for waterfowl, for turkey, do some big game in other states, but I do a lot here in the state of Michigan. And one of the questions that are constantly asked is, how do I get into turkey hunting? Don't know where to start, don't really know what I need. So I figured as a turkey fanatic myself that it would be a great way to spread education to women of just what I know. And to give you a little background on myself, I've been hunting for going on almost 20 years. And turkey hunting wasn't something that I grew up with. It wasn't something that was introduced to me at a young age. It was something that actually in my later adulthood kind of dove into it head first and fell in love with these birds, fell in love with the style of hunting. And it really just absorbed my life that I live, breathe turkeys 365, right? Like every single day, I'm scouting turkeys, even when it's not season, gearing up for them for the spring, months in advance, but also kind of patterning them and seeing what they're doing in the fall. So, diving right into it, the biggest thing is let's talk about turkeys themselves, right? Like turkey mating season, that spring turkey season is what we all get excited for. We love those big old shot gobbles. And a turkey season is typically starting, depending on, your demographic, is going to run March to May. Some of these seasons typically open, I think, like right at that beginning of April area, and typically will run until May, June. And it just depends on your area, depends on units, draws, things like that. So definitely pay attention to that in your state. Every state is a little bit more specific. To know where you need to purchase your tags for what season, make sure that you're buying the right unit, make sure that you're looking at the dates of that season, whether it's private land or public land, and compare that to this where you're going to be hunting. But as far as the birds themselves, right? Like a gobble. Let's start with a gobble. A gobble is something that a male turkey does. Definitely have heard females do it too, as someone who raises birds. But that shot gobble, that drumming, that thunder that we want to hear, that's done by a tom. Jakes can do it. You can definitely hear the difference. But a gobbler is a very distinct sound, right? It's a mating sound for males that serves to attract females and establish the dominance over other males. So when you hear that term shot gobble, that bird is responding back to something. And car doors have set it off. We've talked about that in other podcasts. Dogs barking. You can, use these tools while you're out hunting that can simulate a gobble or maybe even a hen clucking. They're going to create that tom to respond. So that's what a gobble is. But then the famous strutting, right? Male turkeys, they strut this beautiful display of elaborate courtship behavior, which is known as strutting. It involves putting their feathers and putting them up in this fan and spreading their tail feathers out, dragging their wings on the ground to create a booming sound. So that drumming that we talk about, that is their courtship to their ladies, of displaying that they're that big bad tom, come mate with me, right? Like that's what these birds are doing. They're drumming, they're gobbling, and they're displaying this beautiful fan out and puffing themselves up to be larger than other males. No different than the dating world, right? Like these men, they got to look good for their ladies and they got to attract them in. So that's what they're doing. Mating rituals for these birds. You typically see like the attention wanting to be grabbed by the males. They do all this gobbling, this drumming, this fan, and even fighting. So in season prior to mating season, you're going to see what we call bachelor groups. Throughout season, you'll see toms with a couple of hens. You might see the jakes really hanging out together and pushed out, or you might see those jakes coming in and trying to push out like a single lone tom. My son this year actually had a group of 6 jakes that pushed 2 toms out of a group. So it happens, and that's what the behavior you're going to want to look for. You hear the terms for a male turkey as, gobbler, thunder chickens, that beard is just dragging the ground. So you might hear those types of terms, long beard. And regardless of the term, regardless of the demographic, these birds can essentially be hunted in the same way. So you can apply learning how to turkey hunt pretty much in any state. And one of the biggest tips personally is scouting. I don't typically care for going into a situation going in blind. I like to go in a day or two minimum prior and scout those birds, scout the area, maybe even look for roost trees. You can tell that by their stat. So that's something we'll dive into a little bit later in the podcast. But as far as these birds go, a couple of identifying factors, right? We're going to go back to that long beard. You're going to see birds that when you're in the field and you're looking, you might see a bird with a long beard. While you would think that that always identifies a tom, it doesn't. Jakes can get pretty long beards. Usually they're shorter. So it would be a more mature jake that would have a longer beard. Typically they're going to have a smaller, couple inch beard. And until they really hit that like 8, 9, 10 inch, is when you're going to probably assume that that is a tom. But the big thing that you're going to want to look for is that fan. So the center of the fan on a tom, that fan is going to be complete. It's going to be uniform, and it's going to have this beautiful structure of a C shape, right? It's going to dome really perfect. But with a jake, they're going to have feathers in the middle of that fan that are going to be more pronounced. They're going to stick out more. And as that jake matures and grows into becoming a tom, those feathers are going to start to level off. So big thing to look for when those birds are out there strutting is those jakes are going to have those extra little feathers through the center. Could be 5, could be 3. I've seen it a ton of different ways with these birds on their maturity level. But those feathers through the center of the fan are definitely going to be more pronounced. So another piece to these beautiful birds are their spurs. So the spur length is typically determined by the age of a bird. The longer the spur, typically the older the bird. So when you look at these birds that have like the little nubs on them, which isn't always the case, there definitely are toms that have no spurs or have just those nubs. That there's variations to that. So there's always that exception, right? Like there's no set answer. Unfortunately, it is not a black and white thing with these birds. But when you look at it, and that's with any animal, but when you're looking at a tom, you're going to see a defined spur, typically. That defined spur is going to determine that age based on, that half inch and up is going to be the growth of that bird. When you see these birds with these 1.5-inch hooks or what they call limb hangers, you're looking at a very mature bird at that rate. And another thing that I like to use, you're not going to notice this in the field, but once you've taken your bird and you've harvested that bird, there's typically a variation in color in that spur. And it's going to be like a pinkish red, and it's going to fade off to a black. Typically, once they have that black, that is your super mature bird that I pursue. I'm looking for birds in the field while scouting that I'm trying to see before, the wheat starts to sprout or when those fields are freshly tilled. I do look for those spurs and I do pay attention to that because those are going to be my target birds. Now, when out looking for your target birds, there's a couple of tips for where the best place is to look for those birds. So the best places to look is you can start with looking for roost trees. You can look for those roost trees, and they're typically going to be more of a hardwood. They do prefer safety. So just like any other animal, when they are going to their resting place, they're going to look for large, sturdy branches or limbs that are typically running horizontal with the ground. So you're going to find one of the trees that I notice a lot in my area here in Southeast Michigan is sycamore trees. They love those sycamore trees, but they also love those riverbanks. Turkeys are very opportunist animals. So they're going to be looking for a place to roost in an area where there's water, where there's safety, where there's food close by. But other common trees are going to be your oak trees, your hickories, your pines, your cedars, anything with dense foliage, and just those hardwood mature trees is what you're looking for. Typically, when you're out, you can kind of keep an eye out for a tree that has more of a horizontal branch and start looking at the ground. Why I tell you to look at the ground is because when you see a tom is going to have a scat that is like hooked. It's going to be a J shape. If you see that, then you know you have a tom in the area. Male turkeys, they have a little bit more of that J shape. And you're going to look for turkey feathers. You're going to look for that dropping. You can look for turkey tracks. That's another good thing too. And look near water sources. Look near creeks. Look near rivers. Look in areas where that water source is predominant. Typically on the edges of wood lines, opening up to some fields, those fence rows. You're going to be wanting to look in a habitat that is going to thrive those birds. So some of the things that wild turkeys they eat, because they're omnivores, their diet can vary depending on the season and availability of the food. But their primary diet, they're going to be eating, consume a variety of grains and seeds, including corn, wheat, barley, other small seeds found in agriculture fields or grassy areas. They will also eat insects. Turkeys rely on insects such as grasshoppers and beetles, caterpillar spiders, those types of insects for different types of protein, especially during the spring and summer months. They'll also eat fruit and berries. They eat a range of fruit and berries, including wild grapes and blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, and that's going to be particular during the the warmer months of that harvesting season of those fruits. They'll eat different vegetation and clover, weeds, leaves from shrubs and trees. To know once you've harvested a bird, when you go to open up your bird and you cut open that chest cavity, there's a crawl in there. It's this air sac that is right above the chest, right above the breast. And that crawl is going to hold the different vegetation or bugs that they're eating. Really good friend of mine from the Carolinas actually sent me a photo with the cicada hatch, a ton of cicadas inside of this crawl of this bird, or might be a lot of grasshoppers. You might see some grain seeds, especially if you're farmers just maybe freshly planted, and those birds came in and ate the seed. So that's another good thing, is if you're going to be harvesting birds, to and it's kind of just neat to know, but get into that crawl, look at it, and see what it is that bird is consuming. And it might be able to give you tips for if you're going out with your friends, or somebody that you want to get out, you can kind of know what the birds in your area are predominantly eating. But it also might give you a heads up for next year what the birds in your demographic kind of lean towards. So just pay attention to that when you're hunting your turkey, once you've harvested it, to pay attention to what's inside that crawl. So turkeys are phenomenal creatures. And like I said earlier, I scout my birds year round. I want to be ready for spring. I want to be ready for fall. And I just love scouting, and I love watching these animals in their habitat. For people who think that hunters are these terrible people that just want to kill an animal, they're wrong. We truly, genuinely love these animals. We live and breathe them even beyond hunting season. We learn more about them than any animal activist will probably ever know because we just care. We care about the game we're pursuing. We want to make sure that we're being ethical. We want to make sure that we're harvesting the most mature to let those younger ones come in and thrive and breed and keep that gene pool fresh and growing. So it's really important. In my opinion, scouting is probably my biggest tip out there, that if you want to get into turkey hunting and you don't know where to start paying attention to your birds, start paying attention to what they're eating, find those roost trees, and don't just get on them like the week or two before season. Like, really pay attention throughout the year. Turkey hunting it's definitely a different style of hunting, right? Like this, and we'll dive into this more when we get into the hunting aspect. But turkeys are a different style of hunting in general. You can spot and stalk these birds. You can, depending on your state, you can reap them. You can ground blind hunt them. You can sit underneath of a tree and not have anything and just have your camo. And these birds are a spectacular thing to witness, with that drumming and that gobbling and their courtship to their hens. Watching the way they decoy, it's a very sensory hunt because these birds respond well to calling. And it's one of my favorite for new hunters or youth hunters, because even if you're not seeing something, you're probably hearing something. And you have to sit still and you have to be quiet. And it teaches persistence and patience, which I think is one of the most important things that we can teach our children growing up, is that we have no quit, we have no fear, we have this persistency to harvest this bird, but also the patience that we need to sit still, we need to be quiet, and keeping your eyes out and just engaging in what's going on around you, opposed to absorbing into a television or tablet. Like, get them outdoors and try a sensory hunt if you haven't yet. It's great for kids of all ages. My kids have been going out with me for quite a few years now, and my youngest actually got his first bird this year. My oldest got his first bird last year, and it's definitely taken over for them. So I hope it does for you too. We are going to take a short commercial break, and we're going to come back, and I'm going to dive into what you need for hunting season, and what it means for you. So we're going to take a short break and hear from our sponsors, but when we come back, we are going to talk about hunting and hunting season and what that needs to look like for you. So welcome back. Your host, Felicia Marie, and the owner of Misguided here in Michigan, taking out waterfowl hunters, but turkey hunters. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So turkey hunting. Turkey hunting is a pretty easy, and it can be inexpensive style of hunting to get into. But as I said earlier, it's a really great sensory hunt. I don't know many people that turkey hunt that don't just absolutely fall in love with it. Once you've witnessed these birds, especially at such close range, it's different. And I hope that everyone gets to enjoy that. But let's start with the essentials. So one of the biggest questions that I'm asked is, what gear do I need? So starting straight from the get, you have absolutely nothing, right? So essential gear is a shotgun or bow. Typically, I know some people in certain states, they're able to spear them or blowgun them, but for here in Michigan, for the sake of this conversation, or I'm going to assume that everyone is out there using either a shotgun or a bow. So you're going to need that. You're going to need your shells. You're going to need your arrows, um, that type of stuff. But then you're going to need camouflage. So turkeys have a very keen eye. They can see in full color. They see very vivid color, even better than we do. They can see pretty far. They have great hearing. So you're going to want camouflage that's quiet. You're going to want camouflage to head, I say head to toe, even covering your face, typically a hat. Um, you're going to want to cover as much as you can and anything that can minimize movement. So I like to go out with a baseball hat that um, that way it covers my eyes a little bit. I wear a face mask that I typically wear either right underneath my nose until the birds are coming in and I'll pull it up to my eyes. Um, but I also wear long sleeves. I typically wear long pants unless it's really, really hot and I'm going to be in a blind. I wear good boots and I wear gloves. Anything that is going to mask the color of your skin. That way you can get in there and you can blend into your surroundings as best as possible. So in the springtime, it's beautiful green foliage. I'm typically looking for a camo that is going to have a lot of green to it. I definitely still want those undertones of like the darker brown and the beiges. My personal go-to for turkey season is typically Sitka, the subalpine, but I have used some of the She Gear. I've used other camo brands, so I'm not saying that there's one set camo out there, but look for something that's going to blend with your surroundings and your location.